Hello, my name is Lucy Taylor, and this is my final project for ARC631 Architecture and Social Engagement. My presentation is titled Architecture Equals Agency. This project asks a simple but urgent question. What does it mean for architecture to truly contribute to society? My argument is that contribution cannot be measured in form, market value, or technical achievement alone. Architecture matters most when it grants agency to its users, when it affirms everyday rhythms, enables participation, and creates recognition. Over the next 10 slides, I'll walk through the traditional versus participatory models of architecture, highlight successes and failures in engagement, and share 4 of my own design studio projects as case studies. Together, these examples will demonstrate how architecture can act not as commodity, but as a medium of empowerment and healing. Architecture has always been more than shelter. It is a cultural force that shapes how people live, interact, and are recognized. But in a market-driven world, buildings are often reduced to commodities, measured in square footage, spectacle, or investment return. When this happens, the labor and lives behind architecture are made invisible. This echoes Henri Lefebvre's critique of commodity fetishism, where social relations are erased and replaced by abstract forms of value. Against this backdrop, socially engaged architecture emerges as a countermodel. It insists that architecture has ethical responsibilities to promote equity, to honor cultural memory, to heal ecological trauma, and to protect the dignity of those overlooked by profit-driven development. The point is not that aesthetics or technology are irrelevant, but that they cannot be the only measure. At its best, architecture creates recognition, space that communicates, you belong here. The traditional model of architecture functions like product design. Buildings are conceived for efficiency, cost, or spectacle, and delivered to users as finished products. In this model, the architect is a supplier, and the end user is a passive consumer. This is the world of Starchitect, signature forms, or even of public housing built for policy efficiency rather than lived dignity. As Niels Gore has argued, the profession itself reinforces this closure by tying success to licensure and market status rather than public service. The Aga Khan Award has occasionally celebrated projects that appear socially engaged, but are actually symbolic gestures designed to win recognition. In this model, architecture contributes only superficially. Its social and ecological potential is sidelined. It is precisely this limitation, this stripping away of user agency, that socially engaged architecture seeks to resist. In contrast, the engagement or participatory model sees architecture as a tool to restore agency. Here, the architect is not just a form maker, but a facilitator of co-creation. Space is recognized as socially produced. In Lefebvre's terms, shaped by rhythms of everyday life and by the people who dwell in it. Engagement can take many forms. Feminist models that center caregiving, child-inclusive design that incorporates youth perspectives, co-productive models that balance professional expertise with local knowledge, or ecologically responsive approaches that weave human and natural rhythms together. In each case, the architect's role shifts from producer to collaborator, from supplier to partner. Participation is not about token consultation. It's about genuine co-authorship. When designed this way, architecture ceases to be a commodity and becomes instead a shared medium of empowerment, belonging, and recognition. Two examples highlight what successful engagement can look like. First, the Women's Development Corporation in Rhode Island, inspired by the Women's School of Planning and Architecture, created housing that integrated childcare, community space, and flexible arrangements. This was housing as infrastructure for equity, directly shaped by feminist principles. A second example is co-productive housing in Southern Africa, where projects succeeded most when they combined professional expertise with local knowledge. These efforts worked because participation was authentic. Residents were not passive stakeholders, but co-authors. Their lived realities shaped the outcomes. In both cases, architecture became a scaffold for empowerment, weaving agency back into everyday life. These successes prove that engagement is not just a theory. It can and does produce more just, more resilient, and more meaningful built environments. But engagement also carries risks. As noted by Razvi and Garapur, the Aga Khan Award has at times celebrated projects that only appear participatory, what we might call tokenistic engagement. These projects look good in photos, but the users themselves gain little agency. Another challenge lies in incremental housing models. While they can empower residents to shape their homes, they can also offload state responsibility, essentially saying, "We'll give you a shell, you finish it." Without resources, this becomes neglect, disguised as empowerment. The lesson is clear: participation is not a guarantee of justice. Engagement must be carefully structured to be real, not rhetorical. Otherwise, architecture risks turning social ideals into another commodity. This tension underscores the stakes of the work and the importance of designing not just buildings, but processes that empower. My own design work offers 4 case studies of how architecture can move from commodity to agency. In Design Studio 501, I designed multi-generational housing that embeds feminist principles of equity and shared childcare. In Design Studio 502, I created a community learning commons in Leimert Park, Los Angeles, that resists displacement through co-production and civic empowerment. In Design Studio 601, I developed a museum that honors the memory of water, weaving indigenous ecological knowledge into architectural form. And in Design Studio 602, I designed a wildfire recovery facility that recognizes that healing for people is inseparable from healing the land and the animals. Each project tests a different form of agency: family, civic, ecological, and post-trauma. Together they show how architecture can restore rhythms, affirm belonging, and empower communities beyond market metrics. Course readings and broader theory help frame these projects. Lefebvre's triad of conceived, perceived, and lived space reminds us that good design must integrate plans, practices, and symbolic meaning. Feminist critiques, like Dolores Hayden's Non-Sexist City, emphasize equity and recognition of reproductive labor. Co-production models from Southern Africa stress balance between expertise and community voice. Environmental ethics, like Lee Stickles' idea of material participation, cast architecture as a living ecological experiment. And disaster recovery literature, including Mike Davis's Ecology of Fear, reframes disaster as social as much as a natural event. Together, these theories sharpen my argument that architecture contributes most when it restores agency, when it affirms rhythms of life, supports inclusivity, and enables healing in contexts of both everyday and extraordinary challenge. In the end, architecture's contribution rests not in form or spectacle, but in the cultivation of spaces that grant agency. To grant agency is to create recognition. A porch that says, "You are welcome here." A common area that strengthens identity. A museum that honors memory. Or a recovery center that makes healing possible. As artificial intelligence and automation reshape the field, this point becomes even more urgent. Algorithms can generate form, but they cannot confer recognition or dignity. The future role of architects is not to compete with software on efficiency, but to safeguard agency, to ensure that architecture remains participatory, ethical, and responsive to human and ecological life. If space is socially produced, as Lefebvre taught us, then every act of design is also an act of recognition. The question for architects is simple but profound. How can our work communicate? You belong here. Thank you for listening. I hope this presentation has demonstrated how architecture, when stripped of its commodity fetish and reimagined as a tool for agency, can affirm presence, dignity, and belonging. From feminist housing to community commons, from museums of memory to wildfire recovery projects, these examples remind us that architecture's truest value is not market-based, but human and ecological. It is recognition, resilience, and renewal. For me, this project is not just an academic exercise, but a guiding principle for practice, to design spaces that restore agency, foster participation, and support healing. In short, architecture equals agency. Thank you.